Previously on the Lost Railways of County Down. Over the past 6 episodes, we've watched a railway grow. What began as an ambitious Victorian idea had spread across County Down. The railway had reached Comber, Newtownards, Donaghadee, Downpatrick, Newcastle, Ardglass, and Bangor. But by the closing years of the 19th century, the story was beginning to change. The age of simply building railway lines was giving way to something much bigger. The Belfast and County Down Railway had become an established transport system. Every morning, locomotives were prepared. Fires were lit, boilers came to life, signals were changed, tickets were sold, goods were loaded, and thousands of passengers depended upon the railway to get them where they needed to go. The Belfast and County Down Railway was entering its golden years, and this is where our story continues. By the late 19th century, Belfast was being transformed. Industry was expanding. The shipyards were growing. Factories and warehouses surrounded parts of the city. The population was increasing rapidly. And among all of this activity stood one of the most important places in the entire Belfast and County Down railway system, Queen Quay. For thousands of passengers, Queen Quay was simply where their journey began or ended. But behind the station was an enormous railway operation. Locomotives needed somewhere to be maintained. Carriages needed repaired. Equipment needed manufactured. Coal and water had to be supplied. And an increasingly complicated timetable had to be kept moving. The workshops at Queen Quay became the engineering heart of the railway. Imagine walking through the works during this period. Steam hangs in the air, hammers strike metal, workers move between locomotives, fitters inspect machinery, carpenters work on wooden carriage bodies, painters apply lettering and lining. Wheels and other components wait beside the workshops, and outside, another locomotive arrives requiring attention. This was the side of the railway that most passengers never saw. In 1886, new carriage works opened at Queen Quay. It was another sign of how sophisticated the Belfast and County Down Railway had become. The company wasn't simply operating trains. It had the facilities and skilled workforce required to maintain and construct its own rolling stock. Every passenger carriage represented an enormous amount of work. Wood had to be shaped, metal fittings manufactured, seats installed, windows fitted, brakes maintained, wheels inspected, and everything had to survive thousands upon thousands of miles traveling across the railway. Meanwhile, outside Queen Quay, the network itself was changing. Some sections of the railway had originally been constructed with only a single track. That was adequate when traffic was relatively light. But as the railway became busier, single-track operation became increasingly restrictive. Trains traveling in opposite directions had to meet at carefully organized passing places. Timetables had to be designed around them. And as more trains were introduced, operating the railway became increasingly complicated. The solution was expensive, but necessary. Build another track. The section between Ballymacarrat and Knock had begun being doubled from 1877. Further doubling followed towards Comber during the 1890s. The Bangor route was also progressively doubled, with the work eventually completed in 1902. For passengers looking through their carriage windows, another railway track appearing alongside them might not have seemed particularly revolutionary. But operationally, it made an enormous difference. More trains could run. Trains traveling in opposite directions could pass without waiting. Delays could be reduced. And the busiest parts of the network could handle increasing passenger numbers. The railway was adapting to its own success, and nowhere was that success more visible than in passenger travel. County Down was becoming increasingly accessible. A person could leave Belfast surrounded by factories, docks, and crowded streets, and within a relatively short railway journey, find themselves beside the sea. Bangor, Newcastle, Donaghadee. These weren't simply names on a railway timetable anymore. They had become destinations. And the railway understood exactly what that meant. It wasn't enough simply to wait for passengers to decide to travel. The railway could give them a reason to travel. Special excursions could bring huge numbers of people out of Belfast. Families could spend a day beside the sea. Workers could escape the city. Visitors could travel into County Down. And tourism could generate valuable passenger traffic. Newcastle became one of the greatest examples. The railway had already transformed access to the town. But towards the end of the 19th century, the relationship between Newcastle and the railway became even stronger. The Mourne Mountains towered behind the town, the Irish Sea stretched out in front, and the railway could deliver visitors almost directly into this landscape. The company recognized an opportunity, a spectacular hotel beside the railway. In 1897, the Sleeve Donard Hotel opened in Newcastle. Its location was no accident. It stood close to the railway terminus, allowing visitors to travel from Belfast and continue almost immediately into luxurious accommodation beneath the Mourne Mountains. Imagine the experience. A passenger leaves Belfast. Their luggage is loaded aboard the train. The journey carries them south through County Down. Eventually, the Mourne Mountains begin appearing in the distance. The mountains grow larger as the train approaches Newcastle. Steam drifts across the station. Porters unload luggage. And just beyond the railway stands an enormous hotel beneath the mountains. This was more than transportation. The railway was selling an experience. Golf was also becoming increasingly fashionable, and Newcastle offered the perfect setting. The railway became closely associated with the development of tourism surrounding the golf links at Newcastle. Special railway traffic brought golfers from Belfast towards the town. The railway wasn't simply taking people to destinations, it was actively encouraging them to visit. But holidaymakers and golfers were only one part of the story. Everyday life continued across the network. Early morning trains carried workers, market traffic brought people into towns, farm produce traveled towards Belfast, coal traveled across the network, livestock was loaded into railway wagons, parcels moved between stations, newspapers arrived, mail was carried. And at stations throughout County Down, railway employees kept everything functioning. Station masters, porters, signalmen, guards, drivers, firemen, permanent way workers, clerks, engineers, carriage cleaners, ticket collectors, each played a part. A passenger standing on a platform might only see a handful of railway employees, but behind every journey stood an entire organization. Consider the locomotive crew alone. Before a steam locomotive could haul its first train of the day, somebody had to prepare it. The fire had to be established, steam pressure had to be raised, coal had to be loaded, water had to be taken aboard, the locomotive had to be inspected, moving components required lubrication, and only then was it ready for another day's work. At stations, another group of employees prepared for the approaching train. Signals controlled its movement. Points directed it onto the correct track. Porters dealt with luggage. Goods were prepared for loading. Passengers bought tickets. The guard ensured everything was ready. Then came the whistle. Doors closed, steam filled the platform, and the entire process began again at the next station. This happened day after day, year after year. By the 1890s, the railway had become part of everyday life across much of County Down. But there was another fascinating development during this period. The railway was beginning to understand that speed wasn't the only thing passengers cared about. Comfort mattered. Appearance mattered. Service mattered. Carriages improved. Stations developed. Timetables became more ambitious. And the Belfast and County Down Railway developed a distinctive character of its own. Did you know? One surviving Belfast and County Down Railway carriage has a remarkable connection with royalty. Carriage number 153 was built in 1897. Only a few years later, it was used as part of the arrangements surrounding Queen Victoria's visit to Ireland in 1900. And more than a century later, the carriage survives. Today, it forms part of the historic collection preserved at the Downpatrick and County Down Railway. Just think about that. A genuine railway carriage, built during the golden years of the Belfast and County Down Railway, still exists today. It's a physical connection to the railway we're rediscovering throughout this series. And another remarkable survivor was about to appear. Belfast and County Down Railway Locomotive number 30. Built in 1901 by Bayer, Peacock and Company, number 30 represents the increasingly powerful locomotives required by the mature railway system. And remarkably, it survives today. More than a century after it was built, the locomotive is preserved at the Ulster Transport Museum. Not a replica, not an artistic reconstruction. The real locomotive. A machine that actually worked on the Belfast and County Down Railway. By the beginning of the 20th century, the railway had become something the men who planned the original system decades earlier could only have imagined. A network stretching for more than 80 miles, busy suburban services around Belfast, seaside traffic to Bangor, holiday trains towards Newcastle, connections serving towns and communities across County Down, goods trains serving farms and businesses, workshops at Queen Quay, hundreds of railway employees, thousands of passengers, and steam locomotives traveling across the network every day. But the Belfast and County Down Railway wasn't finished changing. Because the 20th century was arriving, new technology was appearing, road transport would eventually become increasingly important, competition was growing, and the railway would have to find new ways of attracting passengers. For now, however, picture County Down during the railway's golden years. Steam rising above Queen Quay, a locomotive racing towards Bangor, holidaymakers arriving beneath the Mourne Mountains, goods wagons standing beside a rural station, a signalman pulling a lever, a porter closing a carriage door, an engine driver opening the regulator, and somewhere in the distance, the whistle of another Belfast and County Down railway train. The company had spent decades building its network. Now it had become one of the defining parts of everyday transport in County Down. These were the golden years of the Belfast and County Down Railway. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love to hear from you. Do you have a family connection to the old County Down Railway? Did a relative work on the railway? Or perhaps you remember stories passed down from someone who traveled on these trains? Leave us a comment below. Every story adds another small piece to the history we're trying to rediscover. And if you're enjoying the lost railways of County Down, please give the video a like and subscribe to Drone Scene NI. New episodes continue every Wednesday and Saturday until our journey through the entire network is complete. The railway had reached its golden age, but the world around it was beginning to change. And eventually, those changes would threaten everything the Belfast and County Down Railway had built.